A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
In 7th grade, my Spanish class was what you'd expect, a mix of awkwardness and the laughter of preteens. But there was something about the way Mr. Alvarez ran the room that made it different. He had this peculiar method that made me both curious and uneasy. Every day, he'd use a cup filled with popsicle sticks, each labeled with a student's name, to call on kids for answers, and each time I watched how he'd dig his fingers into that cup, shuffling the sticks like a dealer in a card game, there was a creeping sensation snaking its way up my spine. The first time I heard my name called, I felt a jolt of anxiety thrumming through my veins, and while most classmates would mutter occasional groans when chosen, I never minded. I was determined to prove myself. But one Thursday morning, as he turned his back to draw a stick, I suddenly experienced an overwhelming urge, a combination of mischief and rebellion, to reach into that cup. Knowing no one was watching, I inched my fingers towards the wooden sticks, feeling them cool against my skin like marrow plunging into ice, and fished out an extra stick. It felt off, slightly hotter than it should have been, but I shoved it into my backpack as Mr. Alvarez announced who he called, blissfully unaware of the secrecy unfolding in those last moments of innocence. Just as the day lingered towards the end, a gnawing curiosity prompted me to take another peek. Feeling the popsicle stick beneath my fingers, I took it out. It was elegantly carved, and embossed into the wood was the faint silhouette of a screaming face, painfully contorted, and for a brief instant, my heart stalled. The next day, as unusual noises filled the classroom, distant hollers and stretching whispers, I decided to show my friend Leah. She gasped, eyes widening in a mix of disbelief and fright when I revealed the stick, and as I told her how I had stolen it, her brows furrowed deeply, but I brushed it off, declaring it was just a harmless trinket from the school. Still, Leah grew more uneasy, insisting that I put it back, but I dismissed her worries, feeling a strange sense of power as the stick sat proudly in my backpack. Days passed, and soon things began to shift. Mr. Alvarez's usual smile faded into something more severe, more brooding. When he turned the sticks to pick names, he'd glance into the abyss of the cup for what felt like endless moments, as if asking it for something. One afternoon while my peers shot paper at each other during lunch, the fire alarm blared, slicing through the humdrum chatter. I bolted up, heart racing. We filed outside into the freezing winter air but found ourselves lingering longer than expected. My heart plummeted when I spotted Mr. Alvarez standing alone in the doorway to the building, staring outside as if he was watching something that was only visible to him. A chill crawled down my spine. I could see tension in his shoulders. Then, he abruptly turned and descended inside, leaving us in hushed confusion. The back of my mind began to itch, questions swirling like a tornado. Why was he ignoring us? That was the same day the whispers started. Only a few classmates mentioned it at first, but soon they snowballed into panicked conversations. Fights erupted in the hallways, students claiming they had seen shadowy figures lurking near the gymnasium, students going missing. I felt trapped inside my own skin. I couldn't shake the creeping sensation that the popsicle stick was somehow linked to everything that was happening. The next week, instead of ignoring what I had done, I asked Leah to come over after school to perform what I thought was a benign séance, just a silly teenage diversion to test our nerves. But the moment we lit candles around my room, she clutched my arm, eyes wild with terror, warning me that she had a bad feeling. As I called out to whatever spirits were listening, Leah went pale. The candlelight flickered with a gust that seemed too deliberate, too purposeful, until suddenly the curtain flew open, and a voice scratched against our minds, warning us to stop. It told us that the popsicle stick held a curse, that taking it was not merely a childish act. I panicked and threw it, the carving catching the bright glow as it clattered across the floor, but by that point, it felt too late. Week after week, I watched as classmates started disappearing, their names plucked from Mr. Alvarez's cup like sickly sweetness, their faces fading from memory as if they had never existed at all. The day Leah was called, I felt the panic fire up my throat, desperation clawing under my skin. When her name was framed by the popsicle stick, she turned to me, eyes pleading, and the realization hit me like 1,000 knives. Each stick was not just taken to be called on, it was a debt, and once called, the name would vanish. It struck me harder when I replayed the sentence whispered to us during the séance. The popsicle sticks were anchors of the lost souls, cursed to feed on the currency of children's lives. In horror, I watched as Leah stood, walking over to Mr. Alvarez, who seemed transfixed, but I couldn't speak, couldn't scream. I felt chained by the weight of my own dread and realization. All thoughts crumbled as I witnessed her turn to look back at me one last time, her face frozen in terror, and just like that, She was gone, another name erased from our collective memory, and the popsicle stick that once bore her identity lay abandoned in the cup. I froze in disbelief, and came to understand the true horror as Mr. Alvarez's eyes fell on me, suddenly glinting with a predator's satisfaction. He reached for another stick but paused, a slow smirk creeping onto his face, and I was certain he already knew my name. I was next, the sole survivor in this game of ravenous spirits, desperately clinging onto a borrowed moment in time, aware now that I had unearthed a darkness that belonged far beneath the surface, just waiting for a soul brave enough or foolish enough to take a single stick.
I never thought my wedding would end in chaos, but when my cousin Lisa showed up in a blood-red gown that clashed with the white theme of my ceremony, it felt like I'd walked into a horror movie instead of my dream day. I had been preparing for this moment for months, pouring my heart and soul into every detail, from the flowers to the music, all meticulously designed to evoke the purest enchantment. While I floated down the aisle in the lace gown I had envisioned since childhood, the embodiment of everything I had ever wanted. I remember the moment I spotted Lisa, standing smugly in the doorway of the venue with that gaudy dress that mirrored the sinister beauty of a vampire in some cheap film. I felt the air chill around me, my stomach twisting with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Didn't she know this day wasn't about her? The whispers of my friends buzzed in my ears, murmurs of disdain that fed my fury as I approached her, my carefully cultivated smile now plastered on my face like a mask. "Lisa, why are you here?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady, knowing the photographer was capturing every moment. "I thought it'd be a nice surprise," she replied, her tone dripping with faux innocence. At that moment, I remembered every family gathering where Lisa had overshadowed me, every snide comment she had made that belittled my choices, and I resolved that today would be different. My heart raced as I glanced back at my fiancé, who had excused himself to handle a family emergency but had assured me moments before that he couldn't wait to see me in my dress. Deep down, I didn't want to cause a scene, but her presence felt threatening, malignant, like she was festering in the happy blooms of this day, ready to checkmate me. As I took a step closer, Lisa's eyes flashed with that familiar defiance that prickled the nape of my neck. "What's your issue?" "It's just a color," she responded, feigning ignorance, but the challenge in her voice stoked the fire brewing inside me. "It's not just a color, it's a wedding." I shot back, my fury bubbling to the surface as I wrestled with the decision weighing on my conscience. A part of me was screaming to turn back, to let it slide and just enjoy the day, but another part clung to the bubbling rage, a sense of justice that demanded action. "Leave. Now," I spat, my fingers trembling as I clenched them into fists. The guests' eyes locked onto us, an audience drawn into an unfolding drama that felt vividly alive as whispers rippled through the crowd, but rather than fear, I felt a surge of adrenaline at reclaiming my day, my moment. Lisa's facade cracked, anger bubbling up beneath her flawless skin as she opened her mouth to retort, but all I could think about was how tired I was of being walked over, tired of being the unobtrusive cousin, the forever witness to her eclipses, tired of everything that had been unsaid over the years. "You're making a mistake. This is ridiculous. You're ruining your own wedding, over something so petty," she shouted, her voice cutting through the whispers, drawing me closer to confrontation. I could see the shock on the faces of a few of my aunts, the mixture of gasps and raised eyebrows filling the room with anticipation, but I had crossed the threshold, I couldn't stop now. With every ounce of resolve I could muster, I turned my back on her, striding toward the wedding coordinator, whose eyes widened in disbelief and then mirrored my determination. "Security, please," I commanded, my heart drumming like a war cry as I heard Lisa hiss behind me, the noise echoing with the venom of a snake cornered, but I pressed on. I knew what having her there meant. It wasn't just about the dress, it was about the years of her putting me in the shadows. Moments later, two burly men approached, their expressions neutral yet ready, and when they were instructed to escort Lisa out, the look of hurt and fury painted her face as she went limp, her shock overwhelming her defiance. "You'll regret this," she spat as she was guided out, each word a dart aimed at my heart. As I stood there, shaking but finally feeling light, the burden of her specter lifted from my shoulders, the weight of my family's toxicity unfurling in the dust behind her. The ceremony resumed, but I could feel the eyes of my relatives boring into my back, the murmurs of disapproval hanging in the air thick as fog, and I couldn't tell if they were aggrieved by my actions or secretly relieved to be rid of the drama Lisa seemed to constantly bring. My heart sank as I realized what I'd done. The moment of triumph had morphed into a shadow of regret, the whispers of bridezilla and family tension stirring uncontrollably around me like a whirlwind of judgmental stares. As the vows were exchanged and I glanced around, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa wouldn't take this lightly, especially with her threatening words hanging heavy in the air. After the ceremony, as the reception blossomed around me in joyful chaos, laughter, dancing, and so many smiles, my joy felt marred by the creeping shadow of guilt. Could I really celebrate a day that, in some way, felt marred by the act of banishment? I tried to brush away the thoughts, focusing instead on the love swelling in my chest for my husband and the genuine moments shared with our friends, but Lisa's presence loomed heavily in my mind like a specter waiting to strike. Days turned into weeks, and just as I thought I could forget about the wedding drama, my phone buzzed late one night, draining the color from my face. It was a group text from my family. My heart raced as I opened it to find a picture of Lisa in that hideous, blood-red gown, with the caption, "Some weddings should be cancelled." My stomach dropped like a stone as her slander spread through our family like wildfire. The rising tide of animosity was making its way toward me, wrapping around my throat, threatening to suffocate the joy I had fought for. Each Sunday dinner became an arena of cold silence, excluding me from family conversations as I was framed as the villain, and while I was initially defensive, the weight of isolation left me gasping. The day finally came when I was invited to a family gathering with an air of dread. As I stepped through the front door, I could practically feel the judgment dripping from the ceiling fixtures. I quietly made my way to the living room, my heart thundering loudly against my ribcage as I caught sight of Lisa, clad in white this time, sitting smugly at the center of the table like some dark queen surveying her territory. The tension gripped me like an iron fist, clenching my heart as unwelcome memories spiraled back. Her smirk twisted with cruelty was overwhelming, laying bare the extent of her hunger for vengeance. I stood frozen in place, contemplating my next move when Lisa's eyes met mine with a glint of sadistic glee, as if she had been waiting for this very moment. "Oh look, the bride graces us with her presence. Didn't you know weddings are supposed to be about everyone?" she quipped, laughter bubbling around her like a toxic potion, and just like that, the room shifted, murmurs erupting anew as I felt their eyes darting with interest between us. Her words were daggers, driving my insecurities deeper, igniting an inferno of rage within me, but instead of striking back as I longed to, all I could muster was a weak smile. "I'm glad to see you, too, Lisa," I managed to reply, forcing the words to escape, every syllable leaving a bitter taste in my mouth while her laughter washed over me like a tide, depending on the whispers of my family to feed her power. As the evening wore on, I noticed that my cousin didn't relent, sowing discord with poisoned words, planting unease in the hearts of my loved ones that grew more potent with every sip of wine. When I left that night, I felt the confines of my own family closing in, shadows whispering ever so softly, was I really the villain? But the truth was, standing at the edge of that wedding day, I had fought for myself in a world that always sidelined me, and even if the consequences were grave, I couldn't say I didn't deserve my moment of victory, however fleeting. So, Ida for having my cousin thrown out of my wedding? I don't know yet, but as I drive away, the question trembles in my mind: what kind of family comes together by building their foundation on the bones of betrayal?
It started as a harmless thread on a late-night forum, a seemingly innocent prompt: "Can you guys name drop your ex's name and a fun fact?" The usual banter unfolded, each poster sharing bittersweet whims about lost love: Amelia, who never learned to ride a bike, and then Ed, whose childhood obsession with collecting stamps made him a trivia master. However, as the thread progressed, one user named Connor posted a reply that caught my attention: his ex, Lisa, who, as he revealed, had a collection of cursed dolls that she insisted could communicate with the dead. Curious, I clicked on his profile, and there it was. His account showed a long history of strange posts surrounding Lisa and her dolls, discussing inexplicable happenings whenever he was alone with them, how she would sometimes forget to feed them, claiming they could eat the vibrations of sadness in her tears, and how her laugh would echo in the back of his mind when he stepped into his apartment, as if she still resided there despite their split. Then Connor dropped a photo, a dimly lit image of a room crammed with obscenely lifelike dolls, their glassy eyes fixated on the camera with such a chill that even my superficial scrolling turned into a reluctant stare. He recounted how, one night, while he was watching them, the dolls shifted ever so slightly in their positions, nothing dramatic, just the slightest angle of their heads, as if to catch a glimpse of something crawling in the shadows behind him. Being a firm skeptic, I brushed it off as a trick of the mind, yet I felt a shiver travel down my spine, a primal instinct begging me to turn off my screen. But then more users joined in, sharing their own stories about Lisa, revealing fragments of Connor's life I had never known. One recounted how during a party, one of the dolls had disappeared, only to return during a particularly nasty argument with Connor, sitting just between them, quiet yet exuding a presence that felt like a warning. A few others claim they could hear whispers in the air when they first laid eyes on Lisa's dolls, an unnatural chorus, a groan, or maybe a plea, though Connor himself vehemently denied that he ever heard anything outside of her manic giggles. But those who knew her well watched in awe as she would sometimes act out conversations between the dolls as if they held conversations with trapped souls, and as the stories piled on, something shifted inside me, unease mixed with intrigue, a feeling so pronounced that I could almost see the specter of my own fear dancing on the periphery of my sanity. Late that night, as I lay in bed feeling haunted by the notion of her whims and his confessions, I searched for more about the cursed dolls, letting my eyes wander over the growing thread. Then a final post appeared. Connor had written it mere moments before I saw it, detailing how he had picked up one of the dolls one last time, its porcelain face so oddly captivating that he had almost forgotten his own dread, only to realize upon closer inspection that one of them had carved the number 13 into its palm. The air thickened with the sudden heaviness of those 3 silent digits. Not an hour later, Connor wrote again, speaking of a phone call with Lisa, who somehow knew he was handling her precious collection, echoing strange multiple conversations about abandonment he had with her even while they were still together. And before I knew it, my curiosity propelled me even deeper into the threads, clicking on posts from others who had spent one too many nights in her presence, only to find their mysterious echoes looped like a nightmare and magnified until they, too, felt the curse tighten around their hearts. Week after week, the thread grew darker, a web of tales converging into a single, horrifying truth. Those who had ever touched or even laid eyes on her dolls faced sinister misfortunes, hospital visits, plaintive mental breakdowns, unshakable shadows lurking at their doors. And soon, Connor failed to respond. Days turned into weeks, each one a reminder of the gaping chasm he left in his absence, leaving behind whispers that hung on fox-like laughter, taunting at the edges of my thoughts, making each creak of my floor feel like the delicate fingers of those dolls inching closer. I finally reached out to his friends on social media, only to be met with a wall of silence, guarded messages and some muted responses that hinted at a fracture they refused to discuss. Then, with a growing sense of dread, I scoured the internet until I stumbled onto a local news report. Connor had gone missing, last seen interviewing for a piece on urban legends surrounding cursed collectibles. Almost as though I was hearing her laughter in my head again, I recalled one of her doll's eyes blinking at me from that photo, the chill in my gut morphing into something more sinister, a vile anticipation wrapping its tendrils. Against my better judgment, I tracked down the address publicly associated with both Connor and Lisa, convinced that this was merely coincidence and not a cosmic invitation for my sanity to shatter. The day I stepped foot in that dimly lit room of dolls, everything surrounding me thickened with a stench that rivaled the taint of mold, yet I pressed on, the air palpable with hushed dread that rushed against my ears like a familiar shriek. I couldn't shake the impression that each doll watched, schooled in the brief moments of unease and fear that seeped from my very core. As I leaned closer to a row of strangely symmetrical dolls, their hollow eyes dimmed like starlight siphoned away into the plush shadows, one of them caught my attention, the very same doll Connor had shared online, its porcelain skin dull, yet its small hand still bore an eerie carving of the number 13. As if tugged by an invisible thread, I reached out, finger grazing the numbers engraved, and in that instant, the world twisted violently. It felt like I was extracted from the moment, severed from time, cosmic echoes crashing into my mind. I heard whispers, a cacophony rising, swirling around me in a chaotic rhythm, stretching deeper into the void, locking in on my vulnerable core. And for a fleeting truth, I understood the magnitude of what Lisa had conjured, what her laughter disguised. She wasn't just a woman, that collection was her legacy, an entity pulsating with all manner of sin, trapped souls desperate to scream and be heard, tortured eternities manifesting in every false smile across gracefully painted porcelain. As the air turned suffocatingly dense, I bolted for the door, running against the undulating currents threatening to pull me into their murky abyss. Fueled by sheer instinct, I ignored the pull of nostalgia, desperation ricocheting between my ribs, finally bursting into the chilly night, drenched in sweat, heart racing. And in a fleeting whisper, I imagined I heard Lisa's laugh, echoing behind me, an invitation, taunting and chilling, promising that no matter how far I ran, one day I'd come back, compelled and enthralled, as I always had been when I first glimpsed her namesake. When I cradled my son in my arms for the first and last time, his fragile body swathed in gauzy hospital blankets, I knew each breath he took was borrowed time, punctuated by beeping monitors and hushed whispers from solemn doctors, a chorus of grief I had never signed up for. They offered platitudes about hope and possibility, But I could see the truth in their eyes. My little boy, born with a heart too weak for this world, was a ghost before he had even begun to live. Holding him close, I felt an unexpected wave of relief wash over me, not at the thought of his impending death, but at the realization that I'd be spared the agony of watching him fight for a life that might never be whole. I recalled other parents roaming the hospital halls, eyes red and hollow, possessing both the wicked fortune and burden of watching their children struggle against a torrent of tubes and ventilators, their laughter replaced by agonizing silence. I had heard tales, just whispers, really, of parents who vowed to devote every waking moment to their child's care, to be warriors in the name of love, but who would be left with nothing but echoes of despair once their battles ended. I've even seen a few of them break, kneeling in the linoleum of the waiting room, cursing God for taking away what was supposed to be good, furiously questioning why their children were chosen to suffer. But for me, an odd sort of peace spread through my veins with each heartbeat in my son's tiny chest. I was grateful the doctors couldn't fix him, that I wouldn't have to watch as he underwent endless surgeries, struggling for a future that could be more painful than beautiful. As I gazed down at his face, a perfect little button nose and wispy tufts of dark hair, I thought about how I would have fought for him, but also how I truly believed I would have lost a piece of my soul as I pieced together our shattered lives, watching him grow through a lens of fear and uncertainty, living each day in a state of anxious fragility. A few hours passed and the sterile smell of antiseptic began to blend with something darker, a weight creeping into the room that made me question everything I thought I knew. It was then that I first felt the cold chill on my spine, a sensation like icy fingers tracing down my back. The air thickened and turned electric, and despite the low hum of hospital machinery, I could swear I heard a low whisper just beyond the threshold of consciousness. I looked up, my heart racing, but the room remained empty except for the flickering lights above. I shook my head and tried to brush it off, but the unease lingered, wrapping around me like a shroud. The murmurs returned, the fading voices growing into something more coherent, a woman's voice from somewhere deep inside my mind, pleading in a sorrowful whisper that I should let him go, that he was never meant to be here. The words rumbled through me like thunder, and I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to remain tethered to reality, but a sudden thought pierced through, a memory of a conversation I'd had with the doctors just a day earlier when they weren't so certain this would be the end. They'd mentioned a treatment, a last-ditch effort to save him, but when I caught a glimpse of those heavy, haunted expressions, I knew deep down I would never be able to go through with it. I blinked hard, glancing back down at my son, watching as the rhythmic beeping slowed to a mournful dirge. Dense shadows danced on the walls, encroaching from every angle, and in my stillness, I became aware of the hollow, haunting laughter echoing faintly through the room, as if someone was mocking my anguish. Time warped, stretching and bending until I could no longer tell if I had been in the room for minutes or hours. My son's face started to drain of color, losing its warmth. The whispering intensified, a surrounding cacophony of unearthly wails and familiar voices filled my ears, and in that moment, I felt a tugging sensation, a cosmic pull that offered only one choice. The air grew heavy, tainted with the scent of rotting flowers, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape whatever madness this was before it swallowed me whole. But then, as if compelled by an unknown force, I found myself leaning closer to my son, burying my face against his forehead, feeling the last vestiges of warmth leak away. The whispers crescendoed into chaotic shrieking, swirling around my head until I couldn't think straight, and it was then that I understood. Every harrowing tale I had heard about haunting could stem from a place of sorrow, a place where grief disallowed closure, the fear of losing a child morphing into a haunting curse. And then, suddenly, the cacophony faded to a whisper. My son's heart monitor echoed one final beep, signaling the end. In that instant, I felt something dark settle around my heart, but a warmth bubbled beneath it. At last, freedom. I was released from the prison of eternal worry, and as he slipped from my grasp, his fragile soul now free from this world, I was no longer bound by the heavy chains of expectation. Yet, the emptiness that followed wrapped around me like a fog, and I couldn't help but wonder if the joy of release was worth the price of living in a world haunted by memories I would never escape. Even now, days after he passed, I can still hear the woman's voice in my dreams, soft and sweet, beckoning me to join him, to let go of everything and start anew. And though the crushing grief threatens to consume me, part of me wonders, if I had just so eagerly wanted this release, should I perhaps follow where the darkness leads? So, yes, in a warped sense, I find solace in knowing he didn't have to suffer long enough for his life to bring pain. He left, and I am left with the remnants of his laughter echoing through the emptiness of my heart, a heart now prepared to follow him into the dark. When I was 9, I was the kind of kid who thought love was something reserved for fairy tales, a notion I wasn't particularly keen on until I met Lila, a girl from my class with auburn hair and the brightest smile that could light up the darkest of days. She didn't know it then, but I had crafted an entire world of daydreams where we were more than just classmates. I was convinced that a heart as pure as hers deserves something extraordinary, and that's when I spotted my mother's diamond earrings, precious family heirlooms passed down for generations. They glimmered like captured stars in the velvet darkness of our dingy living room, their sharp edges radiating a warmth that felt wrong yet thrilling. At that moment, the prospect of Lila's eyes lighting up with joy was too delicious to resist. It eclipsed the warning bells ringing in my head. The only disaster came when Lila had shared that her family was facing tough times, and I thought that I could somehow bring magic back to her life. Driven by impulsive conviction, I stealthily crept into my mom's room that evening, heart racing, breath shallow as I approached her jewelry box. I knew where she kept it, the worn wood creaking softly underfoot as I pried it open, my fingers trembling at the thought that this act of rebellion was just the beginning of a catastrophe I could never fully comprehend. I gripped the earrings tightly, clutching them to my chest as the thrill of deceit wrapped itself comfortably around me like a cocoon. I slipped out of the room, certain that soon, I would become the savior in Lila's story. At school the next day, I presented the earrings to her like a fallen knight offering his shining armor. Her gasp echoed through the crowded hallway, and in that moment, the world was perfect. Yet, bliss is fleeting. When Lila's eyes sparkled with joy, mine clouded with guilt. Word of my dastardly deed spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers and gasps, and when Lila's parents found out, they were furious. Her father's disapproving glare felt like ice shattering my insides, but it didn't compare to the look of betrayal and disappointment etched across my mother's face when she discovered my treachery. In my desperate attempt for love and admiration, I had stripped away the very thing that tethered me to my family. My mother cried in a way I had never seen before, her tears becoming the meter by which my guilt increased tenfold. She had lost much in her life, and within the confines of her grief, I realized, along with her earrings, I had stolen something far more valuable, her trust. In the days that followed, Lila refused to even look at me. I can still recall the hallway whispers regarding why I had acted so foolishly and how my betrayal had deepened the divide between her family and mine. I was a pariah at school, a boy whose heart had ventured into darkness. I returned the earrings to my mother, but it didn't mend the rift that had formed. Life twisted further when strange things began happening in my home. Shadows flitted outside my window at night, whispers cascaded down the hall when I tried to sleep, echoing like remnants of forgotten understanding. My mother became withdrawn, relying heavily on the ghost of her once vibrant laughter, and my father, who had often wielded authority like a sword, now wandered the house as though searching for the pieces of a life he once knew. It became apparent that something unnatural lurked in the aftermath of my theft. It was as if the earrings had been imbued with a dark fascination, binding not only treasures but pain to our family. I had thought I closed the chapter on that blasted day, but it was only just beginning. In the dead of night, exhausted from sleepless hours spent listening to the hushed cries of unfulfilled dreams, I remember wandering into my mother's room, desperate for comfort. Instead, I found my mother standing still, staring eerily at her jewelry box, as though it commanded her soul. Trying to shake her from her trance, I reached out, but she turned to me with hollow eyes, devoid of warmth, and in a voice that resonated with defeat, she whispered, "They want you to bring them back." I froze as terror coursed through my veins. I didn't know what they were. I didn't want to know. Alarm surged within me as I understood that whatever I had unleashed was now bending reality, treading darkly on our lives, malignantly feeding off our anguish. I could feel Lila's absence like a wound that would never heal. She had vanished from my life entirely, her presence slipping through my fingers like the first drops of a relentless rain. Weeks morphed into months, and while our family became a hollow echo of its former self, Lila's laughter, once the highlight of my world, faded into whispers and dreams. I tried to make amends, tried every possible way to repair the broken connections, but the love I had stolen had wrapped itself around my family as chains of despair. A suffocating weight settled upon us. I could hear them talk late at night in low tones, each discussion filled with dread, until one fateful evening, I found myself wandering outside, drawn inexplicably to the old oak tree in the backyard where Lila and I used to play, some strange compulsion propelling me forward. As I stood before the tree, the night pressed heavy on my shoulders, drawing forth dark tendrils of sorrow, and I realized I was ready to give up my last ounce of hope. With tremors of realization shattering my resolve, I whispered to the wind, begging for forgiveness, desperate to reclaim what was ours. Suddenly, a flicker of light pulsed within the shadows of the old oak. I gasped as the air shimmied with an energy that felt alive. It was then I realized, the only way to set things right was to offer back what was lost. I dug into the earth beneath the tree, my fingers clawing desperately against the soil, heart pounding in a rhythm that felt almost primal. I needed to imbue this earth with a debt I owed, to relinquish the chains that bound us all to this waking nightmare. As my fingers grazed the cool metal of the earrings, I withdrew them from their resting place, and the moment I placed them into the dirt, the world around me twisted violently. A darkness poured forth, consuming the air, wrapping itself around my limbs like hungry vines, urging me to submit, to fall. But through the torment, I spotted Lila standing among the shadows, her eyes wide with compassion, yet laced with a knowing wisdom far beyond our years. With a quaking voice, she said, "You can't take things that don't belong to you, they'll always want something in return." Those words echoed fiercely, resonating deep within me. I realized in that fractured moment that love built on lies is the worst kind, and sacrificing everything for an ephemeral dream only leads to despair. And as the shadows clawed at my spirit, I was flooded with regret, knowing I had to let go completely. I had to let her go. The dark whispers spiraled, fraying my grip on reality, and just as I thought I would be swallowed whole, my thoughts coalesced into a resolve. I chanted the name of forgiveness. I let the love I felt for her suffocate the fear, and in a brilliant flash, I awakened back in my room as dawn broke over the horizon. My mother leaned against the doorframe, sorrow mingling with something akin to relief, holding tightly onto the repaired necklace around her neck. My penance transformed into love, and at that moment, I felt what it was to truly lose something precious yet redeem it fully. But while I had restored the balance in my family, the bone-chilling sensation that clung to the edges of my being remained. Days passed silently, but in my quiet moments, I'd gather the courage to glance into the mirror and see not only my reflection but the shadow that now followed me, a reminder engraved with sorrow. It lurked like an unseen predator, and while I wished that the experience could have concluded neatly, the truth lingered. I would be haunted forever, remnants of unfulfilled dreams wrapped around my heart. I understood now, love is a wretched thing, it binds not only in joy but in the chains of terrible truths, and though I had escaped the darkness of that moment, the chill of that haunting lesson, of wishing I had never stolen those earrings, would forever accompany me, a ghost looming in the shadows, reminding me that what is precious should never be touched. I used my infant son's stroller to shoplift food, while he was in it. It's a reality I never thought I'd face, the gnawing desperation that drives a mother to the edge, forcing her to make choices she once thought unimaginable. The first time I did it, I was frazzled, teetering on the brink of a breakdown after losing my job and with bills piling up, threatening to swallow me whole. I wasn't the type to steal, but as I wandered the aisles of the grocery store with my son cooing innocently in his stroller, I felt his piercing blue eyes on me, and I could practically hear him asking if we would have dinner tonight. It was a sickening twist of fate. I reached for a box of baby food when my hand brushed against a pack of 2-for-1 chips, and the idea wormed its way into my mind. What if I could take a few extra things? After all, who would look at a mother and her baby and suspect her of thievery? As I carefully plotted my small heist, I searched for the perfect items to fit beneath the stroller, monitoring the cameras like a fish watching the shark circling beneath the surface of the water. My heart raced and my palms trembled, but I felt a thrill I couldn't deny. It was wrong, deeply, horrifically wrong, but it was also a rush. I grabbed packets of ramen, cans of soup, handfuls of snacks, all easy to stow without attracting attention, while my son remained blissfully unaware, wriggling happily in his little mobile fortress of safety. When I finally made it to the self-checkout, my hands were shaking so much that I spilled change everywhere, eliciting an annoyed sigh from the attendant, but somehow, no one paid attention as I hastily scanned the few mundane items I could actually afford, pushing the rest beneath the seat while keeping my baby occupied with a rattle. The adrenaline surged through me as I finally slipped out of the store, heart hammering in my chest, not from the weight of the stolen groceries, but from the weight of my guilt. That night, as I laid out the food before my son, it was like a feast, even though I knew it was stolen and wrong, and yet my baby laughed and chewed with such joy that for just a moment, I felt like everything would be okay despite the knot of shame in my stomach. But, as the days turned into weeks, what started as a desperate measure evolved into a way of life as normal as breathing. I became a pro at my little escapades, my routines, and my daring maneuvers, always taking extra care to avoid the same stores or to dodge certain aisles where the cameras were particularly unforgiving. Each Saturday, I would strap my son into his stroller and venture back into the retail jungle, slipping essentials into the undercarriage as my heart raced and fear intertwined with the adrenaline of stealing, the sound of my baby's laughter echoing in my ears like a haunting refrain. I became a master of camouflage, exhibiting the casual swagger of a mother just out for a stroll, while beneath the innocent facade, my guilt and paranoia spiraled into a vicious cycle. I even started bringing a friend along, someone who was in the same boat as me, struggling just to eat. For a while, we traded off to lessen the risk, filling our strollers with the comforts of life while cocooning our babies in blankets of ignorance. But one fateful evening, everything changed. I had been in a rush, distracted by a particularly cranky baby who had realized the chaos of our activities, squirming and whining in protest as I stuffed a frozen pizza beneath the stroller, the weight heavy on my soul as I told myself this was the last time, this was all going to end if I could just get through tonight. Just as we were about to make our escape, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a familiar face, a store employee, one I'd seen before, watching from a distance with a calm but piercing glance. In that moment, I froze, my skin tingling with dread as my brain screamed at me to get out, to run, to protect my child. I'm not sure what I thought would happen, but I felt my heart drop as I pushed the stroller forward and my mind raced, desperately calculating my next move while my friend called out to me from behind, urging me to keep going. Panic set in as I navigated the narrow aisles, the air thick with unanswerable questions as my heart drummed against my ribs. I could hear the footsteps following us, growing closer, echoing menacingly in my ears as I maneuvered through the hustle and bustle of the store, glancing behind to see the employee weaving through the racks, moving faster, and though I never thought I would shoplift again, the impulse was so sharp, so immediate, that all logic dissipated into pure survival. Before I knew it, I was staring at the exit, but just before I reached the doors, a large hand gripped the shoulder of my coat. Whirling around, I was met with a familiar pair of eyes, only this time twisted with disappointment. I heard my son scream, the high-pitched wail that could pierce through steel, and suddenly, I was yanked back into reality, realizing I had crossed that line and left innocence behind, not just for him but for myself, too. The embarrassment overwhelmed me as the employee whispered something about the police, and again, I could see the judgment in the faces of shoppers glancing at my shattered facade, the facade I built around motherhood and desperation crumbling into dust. I wanted to scream, to deny it all until my voice turned hoarse, but all I could do was turn to my son, who had shifted from laughter to fear, his tiny lips trembling, and in that moment, I realized I had betrayed him with my choices. As I was escorted away, I felt my world spinning out of control, my heart dropped with each step until I was out of the store, only the reality of my actions resonating through me as I was placed in the cold grip of handcuffs, now truly afraid of what my life would become, but the thought that haunted me the most was of my son, stripped of safety, and I knew then, beyond the palm of that large hand gripping me, I had stolen our future too. Everything lay shattered at my feet, and what had begun as a desperate act of survival had turned into a nightmare I could never escape. I'm having a baby tomorrow and I'm not ready for what's ahead. It's a strange thing to find yourself unprepared for a moment so monumental, especially when you've spent 9 months planning, reading every parenting book, and brainstorming names that would sound cute together, but all that changed when the hallucinations started. I thought they were just my anxiety playing tricks. I mean, who wouldn't be paranoid about becoming a parent? But then, one night as I sat in the nursery, polishing the unused crib and imagining a life of sleepless nights filled with laughter and diaper changes, I saw her, a little girl with dark curly hair sitting in the corner, her wide eyes locking onto mine with unsettling assurance. I blinked, and she was gone. Just like that, leaving a cold trail of dread in her wake. Each day leading up to my due date became a twisted game of reality versus delusion, with shadows stretching across walls whispering secrets I could never quite catch. I called my husband, Jake, into the room one evening, trying to explain, but the moment he walked in, the little girl vanished, and my words faltered as an empty silence settled between us. He brushed it off as stress, suggested a prenatal class, maybe some meditation. But how do you meditate when you can't shake the feeling that something is waiting for you, hanging just out of sight beyond the edges of perception? The following morning, my mother called, and as I lifted the phone to my ear, the little girl appeared again, this time closer, her hair spilling like dark silk over her tiny shoulders. I gasped, and when my mother asked if I was okay, I told her I didn't know, that I couldn't stop seeing things that weren't there, but she insisted I was just overwhelmed, that my mind was preparing for the shift to come. Yet that evening, as I packed my hospital bag and settled into my last moments of silence, the little girl laid her head on my lap, and I felt a strange warmth that sent goosebumps racing up my arms. "What are you?" I whispered, feeling a mix of fear and tenderness swell inside me. She looked up, her tiny face twisted in expression I couldn't quite grasp before she whispered back, "Soon, you'll see." That phrase echoed in my mind as if it were changeling magic, weaving spells of foreboding. By the time I lay in bed that night, every creak of the house sounded like the voice of impending doom, and before sleep could wrap its weary fingers around me, I swear I heard a liquid hiss, something wet and slithering, skittering in the darkness. I dared not open my eyes. I wanted to, desperately, but I couldn't bring myself to confront what lurked at the edges of that pitch-black silence. Instead, dread squeezed my chest, a vice tightening tighter with each breath I took. Morning came too quickly with the sharp ring of my alarm, and I found myself staring at the ceiling in a dazed state, trying to shake off the remnants of night terrors that tangled in my thoughts like cobwebs. My body was restless, anxious, and the little girl was nowhere to be seen. Jake poked his head into the room, his face weary but hopeful, and I pulled on the smile I had practiced for months, but the dread lurked behind my eyes. We arrived at the hospital, and as they wheeled me into the delivery room, I felt a fleeting moment of clarity, as if I could finally shake the shadow from my mind. It was at that moment that the lights flickered, and the room grew uncomfortably cold. Jake's expression morphed from concern to confusion, but I knew, without a doubt, that she was there. "I can see her," I shouted, and all eyes turned to me, disbelief written on their faces as I pointed toward the corner, where the little girl stood, seemingly grinning. But as they looked, she vanished, and my words were met with nervous chuckles and murmurs of false reassurance. I felt frantic, urging them to look, to see how real she was, but the doctors continued their work, oblivious, pulling the baby from me while I fought back disbelief. And then, silence, the kind of silence that pierces through your very being, followed by a monstrous wail splitting the air, but the joy didn't bloom, it twisted into an unseen horror, as if something rotten lay beneath that innocent sound. "It's a girl," the doctor announced with unbridled glee, but the moment I glanced at my newborn, the familiar weight of something missing flooded my heart. The little girl stood beside me, fingers curling in excitement, and as I reached for my daughter, she pulled away. I was forced to watch her crawl toward the exit, dragging my heart along in her wake, and the truth crashed over me like a wave. The little girl wasn't my child but the harbinger of something darker, something that lurked in the recesses of my mind, ripping the innocence away from motherhood. I screamed, my voice a desperate echo as I lunged forward, but she only smiled back at me, a knowing smile, as my real baby wailed louder, lashes fluttering like gossamer. I stumbled back, my legs failing as a horrifying revelation spiraled into view, and as I turned to find help, the room emptied before my eyes, the doctors and nurses vanishing just like the little girl had, leaving only my baby and me in an eerie web of shadow. "Where is everyone?" I hissed, panic tightening my throat, but the little girl spun in circles, giggling, those same haunting eyes locking onto mine, reflecting back the chilling awareness that I was all alone, cradling the fragile weight of the life I'd brought into the world, now forever lost between two realities, one of love, innocence, and warmth, and the other an endless, consuming dark that promised to twist everything I knew. The walls breathed darkness around me, and with each heartbeat, I felt the little girl's laughter lurk closer in the shadows, as if awaiting the moment when she would finally claim what was hers. I've been hiding a massive secret from my parents for the last 3 years, one that has grown heavier with the burden of keeping it from them. You see, it began innocently enough when I discovered a niche online community that played intense pranks and dared each other to do increasingly outrageous things for cash. It was a world filled with adrenaline junkies, and every post I read ignited something inside of me. I started small, joining a few of the challenges and sharing what I could do. The stunts were wild but harmless, like doing embarrassing things in public places, which soon turned into escalating dares that required more than just guts. With each video I posted, the views swelled, and so did my bank account. My parents had no idea that the extra cash they saw me flaunting was built on the back of a daring digital persona I created named the Masked Phantom, who became an underground sensation. I was pulling in thousands each month, but the catch was that I was supposed to keep the channel anonymous. I did everything I could to obscure my identity, using face masks and disguises, and it worked, until one night when a prank I thought was harmless went horribly, horribly wrong. For a special Halloween episode, I decided to stage a haunted house in an abandoned warehouse, enticing my followers to unlock hidden challenges throughout the night. Hundreds flocked to witness the epic chaos I intended to unleash, with fog machines and eerie sound effects creating a perfect atmosphere. What I hadn't expected, however, was for an actual homeless man to have taken shelter in one of the corners, and when the fog rolled in, and the screams erupted, panic ensued. Nobody was prepared for the chaos that followed. The man was terrified, stumbling backward as I jumped out in my witch costume, thinking it was all in good fun. He tripped and hit his head on the wall, hard. By the time police arrived, I was gone. I was just this kid who played this funny masked character all online. But the views soared, my followers were mesmerized by the twisted tale, and I posted a video saying the man had disappeared, adding to the thrill. I suppressed the guilt, unable to halt the rush of cash pouring in and the excitement of my growing fame, but about a month later, I got a message, someone claiming they knew what happened that night. They demanded payment for their silence. At first, I was ready to ignore it, but then came the follow-ups, creeping closer and closer, more intense, more personal, often detailing things only someone at my doorstep would know. I took to deleting my online presence, pulling off the masked phantom like an old skin I was growing out of, but I'd already made tens of thousands and enjoyed a lifestyle that was beyond my wildest dreams. But what started as fun turned into paranoia. I neglected my schoolwork, stopped hanging out with friends, and my once cheerful home turned into a cat-and-mouse game with an unseen pursuer. I thought my luck might be changing when I met Jessica, a fellow student who shared my love for thrill-seeking adventures. She was everything I looked for, beautiful, clever, and fearless. We began dating, and I saw a glimmer of hope, maybe even a way to share my secret, until one night while sitting on a park bench, she asked if I'd ever been in trouble before. The question sent a chill racing up my spine, and in that moment, the weight of the secret felt unbearable. I froze, the truth weighing on my tongue like a stone, but I shrugged it off and told her no, knowing full well the response that would elicit if I opened that floodgate. As our relationship deepened, my deception clawed at my insides. I wanted to trust her, but I couldn't risk losing her or letting the truth slip out, especially with warnings still flooding my DMs. A few weeks later, I walked into my room to find a note pinned to my door, "Told you I'd find you. That man belonged to someone, and now they're onto you. I need more if you want to stay safe." The message felt like a death warrant, and an overwhelming dread gripped my heart. I couldn't afford to back down, this was all slipping out of control. A part of me wanted to run away, disappear without a trace, but with Jessica now invested in my life, I couldn't bring myself to do it. By winter, the spiral of fear clashed with my yearning for freedom and security, but the final blow came the day after Christmas. It was a usual family gathering, laughter filling the air, smelling of gingerbread and hot cocoa. I was fine until a familiar face appeared at the front door, the homeless man. I froze. He was dirty, gaunt, with eyes clouded by the shadows of his past. The moment I realized he was alive, my heart raced. My parents didn't recognize him, but they offered him food and shelter. "Please, don't send me back," he spoke, his voice breaking. My stomach turned. I wanted to scream, to confess everything, but instead, I acted like a coward, standing there paralyzed. I watched as he began to share a fragmented story of his journey, and all I could think of was how to run back to my dark sanctuary, away from the reality I had created. I wanted to deny my involvement, delete all those videos and pretend I was just a scared kid before it all spiraled, but it didn't matter now. The truth was right in front of me, threatening to crash my world of deception down in an instant. By the end of the night, he vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared, and I felt a heavy weight lifted, only to be crushed beneath the guilt that fogged my mind. I tried to salvage my relationship with Jessica. We went out to dinner, and when I looked into her eyes, I could see the concern lurking beneath the surface. She knew I was keeping something from her, and with each innocent inquiry about my life, I felt myself sinking deeper. I failed to mention the absence of my online presence or the terror that invaded my mind daily. Then, one day, the last straw came. Jessica pulled up a news article detailing a series of threats made against the masked phantom, including mine, and she turned to me with disbelief. "Is this you?" When I hesitated, the grief in her eyes was enough to shatter my heart. "You lied to me." She stepped back, and the betrayal struck like a lightning bolt. I could feel everything unraveling, just like the life I had crafted around me. I was lost, frozen in a tempest of guilt, shame, and terror. Then, the final twist, when I turned to leave, a crackling text came through my phone, a single image meant just for me, the headline "Where is the masked phantom?" Next to it was the picture of my parents, smiles radiant. The message read, "Remember, they love you too." I felt my stomach churn, realizing it wasn't just my life on the line, it was theirs. The walls closed in, and my entire existence crumbled under the weight of secrets, lies, and the tightly wound string of chaos I had mixed into the life I hadn't known could be painted so perfectly sinister until now. And as I sat there with my heart in my throat, grappling with unimaginable dread for them, I realized, somewhere amidst the blizzard of emotions, that I was truly, horrifyingly, all alone.
When my cousin Morgan invited me to her graduation party, I was excited but also apprehensive. She had always been the golden child, and I never really measured up. So when I discovered through a mutual friend that she'd actually paid her way through an online diploma mill, a secret she vehemently tried to keep under wraps, I felt compelled to confront her in a way I never had before. As I arrived at the lavishly decorated backyard where Instagram-ready balloons floated like pastel clouds and a makeshift wooden stage awaited the valedictorian speech, I saw Morgan basking in the glow of attention, glamorous in her cap and gown, but something about her smile felt rehearsed, a facade that cracked when I caught her in a whispered conversation with her mother, her eyes betraying a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of the dread that shadowed her achievement. The tension spiraled as I witnessed her proudly accepting faux accolades from family members who knew nothing about the truth, their hearts too eager to embrace the lie she had spun, and despite my reservations, I found myself standing closer than I should have, caught in a tide of bitter resentment and the sinking realization that the very fabric of our familial love was woven by deception. When the moment arrived, and the spotlight danced its way to me, I felt a surge of jealousy threaten to overthrow my sanity as I grasped the microphone, and almost involuntarily, I blurted out, "Congratulations, Morgan. But I guess it's not my fault you bought your degree." The gasps were audible, a sharp intake of air that split the warm afternoon like thunder, and Morgan's expression shifted instantly from shock to rage, the kind that transformed her cherubic face into a monstrous reflection of pure betrayal. Struggling to maintain my composure under the onslaught of disdainful glares from shocked relatives, I felt a rush of adrenaline, knowing I had thrown a match into a sea of dry kindling. It was a chaotic flurry of shouting voices and clattering utensils, her mother gasping as if I had slapped her across the face. Morgan lunged at me, fists flying, but I didn't back down. My voice echoed like a battle cry as I shouted back about the years spent on her high horse while I worked hard for every scrap of recognition I ever got. The guests' faces were a grim collage of disappointment and concern as Morgan choked back tears and accused me of ruining her day, insisting that our family's blood and humor had always been worth celebrating, but I stood firm in my accusation, questioning the very essence of her achievement, a hyena's laugh punctuating the tension as I pointed to her stack of ceremony photos where every smile seemed to mock the truth, and in that moment, her mask slipped away entirely, revealing the dread underneath. The argument devolved into an exhibition of dirty laundry dragged through the sunshine, where her past transgressions and insecurities collided with my burdens, creating an intangible fissure between us that I feared could never be mended, all eyes piercing through me with an intensity I had never felt before, until suddenly, an older relative stepped in, an uncle I hadn't spoken to in years, who claimed to know everything, or at least our family folklore, and in that uncanny silence that followed his boisterous entry, I realized I wasn't alone in feeling weighed down by each lie we had ever entertained. It seemed there were whispers buried beneath the layers of our gatherings, and somehow I had exposed an unseen reality that shook the very roots of our idyllic narratives, and as the evening devolved into something grotesque, I felt the atmosphere shift as Morgan's confidence withered, beaten down by the harsh glare of scrutiny while our relatives circled her like vultures, waiting for her to admit her mistake amidst the chaos I had ignited. Days melted into nights, turning that party into a cursed memory, an echo reverberating in my mind where guilt twisted with vindication. I became the antagonist in my family's story, labeled as the villain who dared to expose the truth in the face of a flawless facade, while Morgan slipped deeper into denial, swaddled by the lies she had built her life upon until her phone began buzzing like a hornet's nest. Yet the only messages I received were warnings from friends out of fear of family repercussions for having spoken my mind. A week later, I awoke to a world shimmering with silence. The calls from my family had ceased, the chatter turned hollow, and every gathering near my doorstep became a reminder of the rift I had created, until Morgan's mother called me with that threatening tone, implying that I had pulled the curtain on a family scandal too sinister to ignore and told me that if I valued our relationship at all, I would confess and apologize, but I staunchly held my ground, knowing deep down our world was riddled with secrets worth preserving. But as tension morphed into shadows, something shifted in the air. Whispers followed me through the streets as eye contact became a dangerous commodity among family, where every encounter felt like a trial for my transgressions, and one particularly lonely night, as I sat on my porch nursing regrets, Morgan appeared without warning, her eyes clouded with uncertainty but her resolve sparked like wildfire. The once inseparable bond now lay ruptured, festering wounds of jealousy and betrayal threatening to drown any flicker of hope. She confessed that she had lived in fear, unable to tell anyone the truth about how she felt trapped in the mirage of success she had crafted, the facade becoming a noose as constricting as the expectations her mother thrust upon her. I watched her as she broke down, everything she personified crumbling into a cascade of tears. I thought this vulnerability might grant us the catharsis needed, but instead, the revelation left a bitter taste that thickened the already toxic atmosphere. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere thickened with dread, but I could not shake the feeling that I had unleashed something dark and vast into our lives. But it wasn't until Morgan threatened to seek her truth among strangers and let the world see what lay beneath our collective skin, that I understood how fragile our positions were. Each word we exchanged now felt like blades sharp enough to cleave the very fabric of our belonging, and I wondered if I had become the architect of my own isolation, torn between the vindication of honesty and the warmth of denial that had wrapped us like a cocoon for too long. When the day finally dawned, bright yet oppressive, I found myself spiraling, the daylight harsh against my regret as Morgan prepared to reveal all on social media. My heart pounded like a war drum, my vision tunneled in on the inevitable pain, but when she finally pressed send, I was left gasping in shock as the floodgates opened. Those who had smiled at her celebration turned into virtual haters, cloaked in anonymity yet wielding their venom like knives as they punctured her facade, leaving Morgan in the ruins of her own making, shattered pieces drifting away as their words became anchors that dragged her deeper into despair. In the aftermath, as relatives distanced themselves and the truth morphed into its own gelatinous monster, I wondered whether I had been right all along or merely too cowardly to save us from the inevitable. And as Morgan sat in a self-constructed prison of hate and sorrow, I learned through the lens of my own brokenness that sometimes, saying the hard truth reveals scars too deep to heal, leaving behind a silence that echoes louder than any shout of victory could ever hope to drown.